Hello and welcome to our series on care in practice. And today we're going to be discussing how to build a culture of support and what that looks like on the ground. Before we get started, I wanted to remind you of resources available in the CARECT Resource Center. We have training and resource libraries. We list upcoming trainings. We have a directory of county-specific information, including county behavioral health and courts in each county. And we have a list of FAQs and then a lot more. There are also many ways to connect with us. You can join our listserv, request technical assistance, and there's a form specific for data collection and reporting technical assistance requests. There's also an opportunity for any stakeholder to provide feedback to about CARE Act implementation. We also have an email. There is no wrong door. So if you have a question or you have feedback and you need help being connected to resources, please feel free to reach out to us at that info at careact.org. I also wanted to point out a few specific resources related to these training and care and practice discussions. So these are resources related to volunteer supporters, families, and natural supports, and peers. We have a number of toolkits, trainings, briefs that outline different ways in which these roles can be incorporated into care, and take a look and let us know if you have any questions on those. So a high-level agenda today. This first section, an overview of support roles. My colleague, Rachel Johnson-Yates, who I'll introduce in a moment, will just highlight some overall introductory information about these support roles. And then the balance of today's discussion will really focus on a live panel discussion hosted with those on the ground in different counties, discussing how they are incorporating these support roles in different ways throughout care. Our objectives today is that you'll have an increased ability to explore strategies for integrating support roles into care teams throughout the court process, and throughout treatment, care planning, and retaining these individuals in care. And then also gaining insights from counties on successful models, adaptations, and lessons learned around organizing around these support roles. Like I mentioned, my colleague Rachel Johnson-Yates will provide an overview of some of the support roles, and then she'll actually introduce the panel individuals, the panelists from counties. Again, this was a live discussion that was hosted, and we'll turn to that discussion after Rachel provides an overview of support roles. So Rachel Johnson-Yates is from Health Management Associates, and she's a licensed mental health and addiction counselor. She also does education around developing innovative programs that focus on mental and behavioral health. So with that introduction, we'll turn now to that live discussion and that overview of support roles.
Welcome again, everyone. And to get us kicked off, the most important part of our presentation today is coming up, and that's where we get to hear from our panelists. But to just frame the conversation today, we wanted to offer an overview of the support roles that we will be discussing. If you could go to the next slide, please. So within the CARE Act, one of the most important things that we want to be able to do is to create a culture of support for the people that are participating in the care journey. What we know is that for a person to be able to attain their definition of recovery, it takes a lot of supports wrapping around that individual to help them make sure that they have all that they need, both literally in terms of treatment and in terms of the support that they have. And so today we're going to be talking about these roles that you see on the screen. We're going to be talking about volunteer supporters, which is a formal term for a court-approved position that works directly with the respondent or participant in the court process to help make sure that they are clearly understanding what's happening in the court process and that they are able to understand what's happening and articulate their needs and their preferences. We'll be talking about peers, who are people with lived experience that often are working with or employed by the courts or the behavioral health systems They may exist in an outside agency. They may be folks that kind of stand alone and are not affiliated with an agency. We'll also be talking about natural supports like friends, family members, and mentors. It's important to note that natural supports and peers may serve as this formal volunteer supporter role within the court, or they may be an outside support that does help support the person through their care journey outside of that formal volunteer supporter designation. So today we will be talking about all three of these realms because they are all so incredibly important to the journey, the success, and the support of the respondent or participant in the care journey. So next slide, please. So I just want to make sure that we all are using the same language when we talk about a peer. So a peer is an individual that is self-identified as having lived experience in the recovery process. And they may be a person who has utilized recovery services, or they could potentially be a parent or family member of a person who's utilized recovery services, either in the past or currently. And they are a person whose role is to help people who are in similar circumstances to what they have lived through. And peers help to prioritize the development of a strong supportive relationship with the respondent. They can often be the first line of connection in terms of outreach and engagement, and are known for using cultural responsiveness, cultural humility, being very person-centered, and helping with advocacy and helping the person self-advocate for their own preferences. And they also help to represent and highlight the voice of the client. Next slide, please. And then when we talk about the volunteer supporter, just to jump a little bit more in depth, the formal definition is the volunteer supporter is an adult chosen by the respondent to provide support throughout the care process and to promote the respondent's preferences, choices, and autonomy. And so you can see here on the screen the different responsibilities of the volunteer supporter. Really what it boils down to is they're there to support the will, the preferences, of the respondent, and they are working to assist them throughout the care process while making sure that they're respecting the person's values, beliefs, and preferences, using key principles of trauma-informed care, confidentiality, and then working to really avoid their own conflicts of interest, biases, preferences, because their role truly is to help promote the best interests, preferences, and choices of the respondent in the care process. Next slide, please. And then, as we talked about natural supports, these are the informal non-professional helpers. They can be friends, family members, peers, community members, and they are there for a number of things, like giving encouragement, offering emotional support. They may be helping with daily tasks, maybe helping with things like transportation. And they also might be who helps connect the individual with really important pro-social activities like social engagement, participation in activities in the community, or just there to be a friend or support person for them. And again, these three areas are the types of roles that we will be talking about today. Next slide. And the reason that we are bringing this panel to you today is because in our most recent survey in this area, we have seen that counties are reporting that they do need some extra support in this area. So we saw that almost half of counties said they needed some additional support and work in terms of providing family supports. Over half indicated that they are still needing to do some work and make some progress in terms of integrating peers formally into the CARE Act. And then we saw that almost all of the counties said that they were needing some support and still had some room for growth in terms of how they are organizing around that formal volunteer supporter role that we described. Next slide. Okay, now we're moving on to our panel discussion. So if you go to the next slide, we would love for our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. So we'll start with Delilah.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Delilah Garza, and I am the Community Enrichment Director for Behavioral Health and Recovery Services in Merced County. I'm glad to be here, and thank you for having me.
Thanks, Delilah. Amber?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amber Irvine, and I am the Behavioral Health Program Coordinator for the CARE Act program in San Diego County. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Thanks, Amber. Martin.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am Martin Jones. I'm with Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, and I have oversight of the CARE Act countywide program as well as the AOT program as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Melanie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Melanie Kushner. I'm an LCSW, and I'm Director of the Collaborative Justice Programs in San Francisco. Even though Care Court is not a traditional collaborative court and is not Hi, apologies. I'm Melanie Kushner. I'm an LCSW. I'm the Director of Collaborative Justice Programs for San Francisco. And even though Care Court is not a traditional collaborative court, there are so many elements about it that really, really require multiple partners working together in the best interest of the respondent. So I've been a part of it since day one, and it's wonderful.
That's great. Thanks, Melanie. And just as a reminder, this panel is for you, the participants in the session. So we want to make sure that you are getting what you need out of the panel. So please, please, please utilize the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask us any questions that you might have. We have, as you can already tell, but you'll find out even more. We have just such a great group of folks with such a variety of experience and strategy in this area. And just thank you so much to all of our panelists for being here today. And with that, we will go ahead and jump into the questions. So our first question is around how can you help describe and help us understand a little bit more about how your county has been just organizing around the volunteer supporter role? And Amber, if you don't mind kicking us off, we'd love to hear about what you all are doing in San Diego.
Of course, thank you so much. Yes, we have done a lot of work around the volunteer supporter role. I think it's very important, especially to offer that role and explain that role to individuals, because I think we're seeing that it does help with the commitment to the care process, and also sort of serves as a protective factor in that oftentimes individuals that are experiencing periods of decompensation may be struggling to really find their voice and be able to advocate for themselves during those times. And having that volunteer supporter present and an active part of the process, we have seen helps sort of provide another avenue for information and identify areas where the care process can be more supportive.
And Amber, if you don't mind me asking, I know that when we talked, you had mentioned that there's something about that formal appointment of a volunteer supporter that seems to really help with the way that the engagement is happening. Do you mind expanding a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes it helps the individual feel like they're not alone in this process. I think it helps clarify that this is really meant to be an extremely supportive and collaborative experience rather than a punitive one in any fashion. So I think it also gives them that choice to have someone else involved in the process with them. So I think we've seen it when our participants do opt for supporters, we've seen it to be valuable.
Thanks, Amber. Melanie, we'd love to hear. I know you all are doing a lot of work around how you're developing the volunteer supporter role, and peers are a big part of that for you all. Do you mind talking about how you're developing and organizing peers in terms of that volunteer supporter avenue?
Absolutely. Peers are one of the most important part of our current care court. They can provide something that no clinical staff can, no attorney representing them can, and that's sort of just this very basic human interaction with someone who's been there, done that, and is doing well and sort of having this wonderful, positive life. And so when it comes to the volunteer supporter, the respondent may elect a family member, but they may also be wary of the family member. They may think the family member is the one that filed the initial petition, and they may resent them for that. In our county, public health takes that over and they become the filer. But until then, it could be the family member listed. So that may not be the people that they want. We have peer support from the Mental Health Association of San Francisco. And the peer mentors have been both RAP and advanced RAP certified, and they're really amazing at approaching the respondents and engaging them in a way that really no one else has been able to. So if they don't have someone they'd like to appoint as their volunteer supporter, they are welcome to have one of the peer folks, one of the peer specialists be in that role for them.
That's great. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate what you're saying about the nuance between family members and non-family members, and how, there's such a difference in every care participant. For some, family members may be the primary support. And for others, that relationship may have some opportunity for healing, or there may be some ruptures there where a family member isn't really a fit as that primary supporter. And so having that peer connection is so important. And we had a follow-up question for you, Melanie, that says, and this is from Jennifer, that peer specialists are certified throughout the county. Could you explain a little bit more about how CareCourt is using volunteers as peer supporter? They're distinctly different.
They are, and because this is a volunteer role, the peer support specialists are, of course, that's a paid position, not through county behavioral health, through a nonprofit called the Mental Health Association of San Francisco. And in working with them and negotiating and figuring out how to make the best match, they have said that they will use volunteer time to act in that role should the person want that the peer specialist to be in that role. A lot of the people in San Francisco that we're seeing coming in really have no one. They have behavioral health, and of course we understand these are the folks who don't want to be engaged. That's why we are looking at care for them. These aren't the people coming regularly, showing up, engaging in treatment. These are truly the folks that want to be left alone. And if a lot of them have no one that can act in that role. So the supporter part is volunteer, but there is the paid full-time role, and they coexist in that way, wearing different hats. It's been very effective for us.
Thank you, Melanie. And I think one thing that's important to note is that this does not replace the peer that's on a treatment team. So in care and in the way it's operationalized in counties, what we're seeing is that peers are really being embedded in multiple parts of the process, meaning there may be peers that are dedicated to, and we'll talk about this more later, but being dedicated to that support during court hearings, navigating the court processes, et cetera, peers dedicated to outreach and engagement, and then peers that are embedded in the treatment team, and kind of everything in between. And I think that's really important to note as well. So yeah, thank you. So with that, I kind of want to talk about, so we get a lot of questions about when in the world do we start building volunteer supporters in. We've all seen the diagrams of the care process. There's a lot of decision points and a lot of things happening as people move through the journey. Delilah, I'd love to start with you to talk about at what point do you start working with folks, talking about when the volunteer supporter should come into play? At what point do you start identifying volunteer supporters for the people that you're working with? What's that looking like for you all?
Thank you. Yes, of course. In Merced County, obviously the volunteer supporter, we value them very much because most times they have the most historical information on the client and they're really able to provide that support and guidance to the client. And so when we're initially conducting outreach and engagement and we're explaining the program, how it works, who the players are to the client, that's where we're initially having that conversation about whether they opt to have a volunteer supporter if they have a family member or a friend or whoever it may be, but really explaining what that role looks like, what they're able to do, and how they may assist them. And so from the start, that's where we're engaging that person should they be chosen. And again, providing that same information to that volunteer supporter in terms of the process, because a lot of this is foreign to the client and the volunteer supporter. And so we want to make sure that everything is clearly communicated, everyone knows how the process works, and where we are in the process so that everyone's on the same page.
That's great, Delilah. So it sounds like really for you all from that almost that first touch point, you're letting folks know, you're kind of socializing them to that role, and that could be something that could be a support if they choose to participate in the care court process. That's awesome. Martin, how about you? What are you all doing in terms of when you start talking about volunteer supporters and looking at when those are incorporated into the process for the participant?
Yeah, thank you for that. Here in LA County, this is an evolving process, and I think we are, of course, morphing every day as the program continues to build and accelerate. But we really have the conversation started around volunteer supporters, around peers, very, very early in the process. In fact, during our hiring process, we begin to discuss with candidates the importance of amplifying the peer voice and the importance of incorporating peers into every aspect of our service delivery teams and ensuring that the values of the individuals whom we onboard is in sync, are aligned with how we envision the program moving forward. Because as was already said, peers have an avenue, they're able to build a bridge that even those of us, professionals with our licenses and degrees, we fall short, unfortunately, and we're unable, in some instances, to build that same type of bridge. So we really amplify the importance of peers in this process and really do our best to incorporate in every aspect of our service delivery system as it relates to working with our CARE Act participants.
Thank you, Martin. And Amber, you all are doing some interesting things around including the public defender at really, really early on at that initial outreach, and kind of while you're starting to introduce the volunteer supporter. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what you're doing there in that realm?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We've really in San Diego tried to take the most person-centered approach possible when it comes to the CARE Act, as I think many counties have. That's, the goal of CARE. And one of those ways that we saw early on is that once that petition was filed and the public defender was appointed, BHS is ordered to investigate, and it was sort of a mad dash of everybody trying to locate and engage that individual, which we were seeing was very overwhelming for the respondents that we're trying to build this relationship with and who have historically maybe not had the best experiences or are hesitant to engage in services for a wide variety of reasons. So having that approach was overwhelming. So we came to the table and worked collaboratively to identify a process by which our clinicians first and peer support specialists who have been amazing go out and engage the individual. And then once we're able to build a little bit of that relationship, and part of that is discussing the role of a supporter and how they're really in the driver's seat of this process. And then we outreach together with the public defender and have our team actually introduce the public defender to the individual, and sort of present as part of their team, that we're all in this together to really support them. And so she's also able to discuss the volunteer supporter role with the individual, and help them identify who might be appropriate in that role, and also let them know that this process can be very fluid, where if you're identifying a supporter, they always have the right and ability to change who that supporter is, to add a supporter later in the process, to remove a supporter if they feel like they haven't been effective in that role. That really, it comes down to what the respondents' needs are.
Thanks, Amber. That's awesome. And when we're talking about volunteer supporters, Amber, since you're already off mute, who all are you all seeing serving as volunteer supporters in your county?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have seen a variety of individuals serve in that role, but most frequently it has been family members who serve as the volunteer supporter, and more specifically siblings. So we have seen that probably some of the most successful volunteer supporters have been siblings. And I think, we talked a little bit about how oftentimes that volunteer supporter has a lot more historical knowledge of the individual. And there are a few people who will have more historical knowledge than siblings. And of course, parents as well. But I think sometimes what we've seen is having a parental role there has, there's a history there between
Sure.
a child who then becomes an adult child, and a sort of authoritarian nature to being the parent. And sometimes that can create interesting dynamics where we're really trying to honor the person's autonomy and promote that. And having a parent in that role sometimes can create that sort of frustration there. Whereas siblings are really able to approach the process from this sort of mutual, like, just care and respect of we're in this together. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but more just support you in this process. But still bringing all of that historical knowledge and the true deep care for the individual that they will have for long after the care process concludes. So we have also seen more formal supporters in professional roles, such as NAMI or from outreach teams. We do have an outreach team in San Diego called Healthcare in Action, who has been just amazingly collaborative. And we have had some volunteer supporters from that organization who have volunteered their time to really support these people that they feel very invested in and have been part of their journey prior to entering into care.
That's really great. I really appreciate the myriad of folks that you all have engaged in the volunteer supporter space, because it's family, it's folks from NAMI, it's homeless outreach and engagement teams. I mean, that's a really great variety. And Delilah, I know that we heard from Amber about the role of siblings. I think you all are seeing a decent amount of family members as well, but it sounds like I think you all are having a little bit more parental involvement. Did I get that right?
Yes, thank you. We have the majority of our volunteer supporters have been family. We've had a little bit of everything. We've had parents, siblings, and even adult children. But one of the really neat things that we've seen in our county is that the volunteer supporter they have the most significant history, as most have shared, but they also may have had some history that hasn't been that great with that person. And so, there's been some relationships that have been strained. And so what we've seen is that some relationships have actually strengthened as being a part of the care process, and seeing that person go through the journey and really have, these milestone successes as they work through it together. It's really strengthened some relationships that, in the past have been strained. So that's something that we're really happy to see in our county. And I'm sure that that's happened across other counties as well.
I think that's really beautiful and powerful, because I think when we read about the volunteer supporter role, in the statute, that we don't necessarily think about how it could be healing and the restorative properties that it may have for some of the families impacted. And I think I really appreciate you sharing that. Before we kind of shift to the conversation about peers, I would love to hear from you all. And Delilah, I'll start with you again. Can you talk a little bit about how you're supporting and training volunteer supporters? So I'm thinking, if I'm a family member of a person that's participating in care, and the court approaches me and says, "Hey, do you want to be this formal role with this official title?" I might feel a little bit nervous about that. And so can you talk a little bit about what sorts of support and training you're offering for folks that do step into this formal volunteer supporter role?
Sure. So one of the first things that we do, obviously, is, communicate the process to all parties involved. But we're also sharing that volunteer supporter toolkit, so they have something that they can take with them to reflect back on as they're going through the process. But one of the most important tools is communication. So really maintaining communication with not only the client, but also the volunteer supporter, explaining the process, being responsive, answering questions, checking in. So just really maintaining communication, even when there isn't a task to be completed, we still check in. As we know, things can change significantly in 24 hours or a week. And so we just want to make sure that everyone's aware of the process, everyone is comfortable in the process and clear on the process. So again, just communication and maintaining that communication, making sure that all parties involved are comfortable with our team and are familiar with our team. We have a team of three, which is a mental health clinician, a peer support services worker, and a mental health worker. And so we all work in conjunction in conjunction as a team with the family to make sure that no matter who answers the call, that person is going to be very aware of who our team member is and comfortable in speaking to them.
So it sounds like you're offering really proactive outreach and support to family members in general, and then especially folks that are serving in that more formal volunteer supporter role.
Definitely.
And Amber, you all are doing something similar in San Diego in terms of supporting volunteer supporters and family supports, kind of that fall in that natural support category, and are even looking at setting up a support group. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what you all are doing there? I think it's really, really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've certainly seen the vast majority of petitions that especially initially were filed were from family members. And it's been a long road, for them to be getting to a place where they're filing a care petition on behalf of their loved one. It has been a long road for these families. And we're seeing not only does that respondent really need support and engagement, but so does the family. And so we've really seen that to be a need. In terms of actually entering into the volunteer supporter role, we heavily utilize the volunteer supporter toolkit that actually HMA has provided, and it's been a fantastic resource. And we do ask that prior to accepting that role, that they understand what that role entails by viewing the trainings and the tools in the toolkit. But in terms of offering that support to families, we are actually working on developing a contract to offer those support groups for family members that are going through the care process. And that would be open to not just petitioners, but any individuals who have a loved one who is going through this process, or who they're considering filing a petition for, or who are struggling with serious mental illness and are not engaged in treatment, because that is so critical. And there are so many families that have been struggling for so long and could really benefit from that supportive group environment, and just understanding that they're not alone, and understanding also the resources that are available to them. So not just a support group as an outlet for sort of validation and shared experience, but also an area to understand the complexities of our systems of care and how to navigate them and utilize the resources available.
That's awesome. And so you all, I appreciate what everybody's saying so far, because it's been this really beautiful combination of certified peers, of family members that are there as a support, in kind of a informal role, and then peers and family and loved ones that are stepping into this volunteer supporter role. And what I really also think is beautiful is that you all are not only focused on supporting the care participant, but the folks that are involved in supporting their care, because they, as you said very beautifully, have it's been a long journey. And just want to note that the volunteer supporter toolkit has been dropped in the chat. So if anybody has not had a chance to check that out, please do. There's a lot of really good information there. Melanie, we had a question come in for you. This is from a forensically focused family advocate in Riverside. Part of their assignment is supporting families in collaborative courts and or care court. Do you all have a family advocate supporting families in your collaborative or care courts?
We don't. It's not a position that the court has created, our court. If it's something that public health wants to do, I'm all for it. I think it's a great idea. I think here in San Francisco, like I'm just learned so much from listening to Amber about how we could be engaging family members more and stronger. And I'm hearing very much in San Francisco how it's such a fine line between supporting the family and kind of not following what was laid out in the slide that we had on just prior to us starting to talk, which is support the will and preferences of the respondents.
Mm-hmm.
So what we risk in San Francisco, what we see that we risk is when it is the family, if they're the ones who filed, or it is NAMI. Now, these folks are not, they're amazing and they're needed. And we see these relationships being rebuilt in beautiful ways. And what they're advocating for may absolutely not be the will and preference of the respondents.
Sure.
NAMI really advocates for the family. I'm not saying that that's wrong. It's critical, and the family needs support. And so when we brought people on, and we brought on the Mental Health Association of San Francisco specifically because they are against care court. They were vocal opponents, and they were interviewed many times. They, all the adjectives for disability rights and people having autonomy, they were front and center. And I said, who better to bring to the table than the voice of the people standing up for the will and preferences of the respondents, even though what the family wants, what NAMI wants, what I want may be completely not in line with what the respondent wants. This is a voluntary court, and we want to engage people at every level, but I think it's so easy to kind of take power over instead of power with, particularly with someone who doesn't want to be found. We're trying to engage them, and these are not necessarily the participants' wants, what we're kind of volunteering them to do. So I just caution around keeping that last slide. There are 2 paragraphs around what the respondent wants, keeping those front and center, because it may not be the right level of care, it may not be the right level of treatment, and it's written into the legislation. So, yeah, so I might have gone on a tangent. I apologize.
No, I think it's well taken that it is for any of us very difficult to separate out our own history, our own preferences and perspectives, away from truly helping highlight the preferences and the desires of the person that we're representing in that volunteer support or other support role. And that's challenging, because we are human, and it's almost always, those blurred lines are almost always blurred because of love and because of wanting the best outcome. It's very difficult when we have different pathways toward that outcome, for sure. Martin, I am really looking forward to you sharing with the group some of the work that you all have been doing around, just building up, really even to Care Court, around recruiting, empowering, training your teams around the role of peers. We know, nationally, we are doing a lot of work to better incorporate peers into the work that we do, and we are all growing and improving this area. And Martin, you have some really great things to share about how that's been embedded in hiring, training, onboarding, all of these things. Could you talk a little bit about how peers are involved, socialized into your programs, how they're embedded into the work that you're doing? We'd love to hear about what you all have going on.
Sure, I can. Just a quick comment first. Totally agree with what has been said around the need for support of the families or the petitioners. And we in LA County as well, we're implementing a psychoeducational forum to really support and uplift family members, petitioners. But again, there is that balance between the participants' wishes, beliefs, preferences, and sometimes they do clash with those of the petitioners. So that's a very delicate balance that we're aware of and navigating as well. And we're launching that particular vehicle later this month. So more to come on that. In LA County, we have a mixture of individuals who, we have an individual who's certified as a peer. We have several others who are in the pipeline to receive their certification in terms of being a certified peer. But we have many individuals who have lived experience, from our substance use counselors who are part of each team. We have community health workers who are part of each team. And what we do is really promote the importance of every team member's voice as part of our process. So, like the other teams, as part of our outreach and engagement process, as part of our treatment teaming process, we make it clear to our staff, to our team members, that everybody's voice is important. Everybody has something to add, to highlight, to include in terms of really giving insight into what they're observing with our participants. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes some of our licensed folks, we have LCSWs, we have psychologists, we have nurses, but sometimes the perspectives can be different. And so really amplifying and elevating at every level, from program planning and implementation to treatment team planning. And even, as I mentioned earlier, we've integrated this also even into our recruitment and selection process, where we want individuals to know on the front end that this is one of our values. And certainly we can bring people along in terms of that, but we would much rather have individuals know at the onstart that this is something that we value, peer support, inclusion of peers, the peer voice, and that what we've seen here in LA County is that it's made a world of difference in outreach and engaging individuals who may be, reticent or reluctant, or, the whole court process can be scary for folks. As much as we say, oh, it's a civil process, it's not criminal, it's civil. But we know that there's been historical trauma, there's been all kinds of, if we look at a trauma-informed approach, right? What has happened to you, or what have your experiences been? We know that a high percentage of our population have had challenging experiences in many of these spaces. And so leveraging peers helps us to bridge the gap. It helps us to really almost, have a kinder, gentler, friendlier approach to really engaging individuals in services that they may not at points in time really recognize that they need at various points in time.
And you all have been working for the better part of a decade to embed peers in your programming and to kind of really define the value of peers within your treatment team as well. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, you're correct. Karis Myrick was our the first peer chief in LA County. Now we have Dr. Tony Robinson is the current peer chief. And this is a large scale culture shift within the Department of Mental Health. We have over 7,000 employees. So anytime that you do a culture shift, it takes a period of time. It takes training and retraining and integrating within all aspects of your service delivery system. So we have individuals who tell their story at every level of our organization. So not only as we're talking today about peer support in generally individuals who are on the front end of outreach and engagement, but we have individuals with lived experience at every level of our organization, and we value that. The voice is important. The experience is important. Statewide, of course, there's training for supervisors who supervise peers. We leverage all of that. We're promoting the certification of peers. We have scholarships for the exam. We have exam prep, coaching, support. So we have a pretty full-scale approach in terms of supporting the integration of peers in our outreach teams, in our clinics, at every administration, every level of our organization.
That is really great. And I think that is such an important aspect because, there are a lot of different members in our treatment teams, and, we've all seen instances of trying to figure out how and where to define the peer role. And I think that top-down expectation that peers will be embedded in every level of every program that we have is a really wonderful way to incorporate lived experience into the behavioral health network. Melanie, you all are doing some really interesting things around the community outreach and engagement realm of the peer work in terms of housing and gift cards, and not to give any spoilers away, but I'd love it if you could share a little bit about what you all are doing in that area, because it's so creative and just so great.
So yeah, we are. When we came to the table to get started and plan Care Court, and we were actually us, San Diego, and then LA about a half a year in, we were all among the pilot counties that started it. So we, from the court side, so because I'm a court employee, not public health, it looks a little different. But the money we received for Care Court was really helpful and allowed for a lot of creativity. So, guys, if you're in behavioral health, don't feel like you can't ask the court if they can support some of this with some of their funding, on the DL. But what we saw as most critical in creating this was two things, truly. Behavioral health, even though there's a identified unique care team, they're overwhelmed and it's going to take them a while to connect and find the person. So we knew that if someone comes in, they're a respondent, they're considering, they're on the fence, they may not have seen someone yet except to be served. They may not have engaged with someone on any level yet or want to. And they may be wandering the streets of San Francisco all night. And we're asking them to make a decision to commit to getting well. We have had some really kind of sad cases, and we have the peers in the courtroom. So somebody comes in and right away the peer can meet with them. If they're unhoused, one of the ways we've spent our money is we took over part of a master lease of an SRO that's not in our high drug use areas. Excuse me, sorry. So literally we have people contemplating entering or agreeing to care agreement, care plan, but they have nowhere to sleep. So we, same day, that peer can escort them to this place, to this really actually nice SRO, and house them that day. I mean, we're talking Maslow's basic hierarchy. These folks need food. These folks need unsoiled clothing. And then when we're looking at level 2 of that sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're looking at safety. And, our folks are vulnerable. And I don't believe that they feel incredibly safe talking with the system. Martin highlighted that, like, people come from really traumatic experiences with behavioral health, with systems, with medical models, with incarceration, with court. We've had people say repeatedly, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't commit a crime. Why am I here? Because whether we want to criminalize mental illness or not, by putting someone in front of someone in a black robe, even though that's not the intent, we are. So we have to be really cautious about how we do that. And the peer allows for that space. They're like, they'll have a $5 gift card. Let's go grab a cup of coffee. Let's go to Goodwill and get you some clothes. Actually, let's walk to our office. We have clothes for you in your size. Do you need me to swing by and meet you so you can make it to court? And it's been so amazingly helpful. Peers are able to engage in a way that no one else can.
Yeah.
Just by virtue of there's no clinical expectation or duty or role. They're a peer. They're, someone to walk with you, to listen to you. If they are the volunteer supporter, to have your back and make sure your wants and needs are articulated. And so creating that, and again, creating it outside of the Department of Public Health through a nonprofit, has given so much space for trust, safety, direct, like, hey, buddy, you're a little smelly. Let's get you some clothes and a shower and some items, toiletries, or we really want you to be able to maintain this room until you do agree to go to treatment or a bed opens in the right level of care. So I'm going to come by and help you clean your room and bring the cleaning products because you still can get evicted. It's been invaluable. And just in meeting basic needs, when you have a place to sleep, a bed, to lay your head down on, a door that locks, like, it's life-changing. It shouldn't be, but it is.
Thank you, Melanie. And looking at time, I know we're very close to wrapping up. If you all wouldn't mind sharing it just in, I'm going to say 10 seconds or less for the sake of time. So big challenge here. For counties that have not yet really gotten their volunteer supporter or other supports approach off the ground to the point that they'd like to, in about 10 seconds or less, what do you think is the most important thing that they can do or first step that they should take? And I am going to start with, just a surprise to everybody, I'm going to start with Delilah. Delilah, what would you say, 10 seconds or less? What's the most important first step that they can take?
I would say explaining the process to the client and how that volunteer supporter can really be beneficial to assisting them. And I would compare it similarly to going to a doctor's appointment. When you go to a doctor's appointment, and you're expecting maybe not great news, that person who's accompanying you may not know, they're not a doctor, they don't know either. But just having someone familiar in that process really helps you be more comfortable, a little bit stronger, and just really have a better journey through the process.
Thank you, Delilah. Amber, what about you?
I agree with Delilah. So in the interest of time, I would say that would be one of the first things. But to piggyback off that, the next thing would be to really educate that person who is stepping into that volunteer supporter role about what that role is intended to look like. I think we talked a lot about how sometimes that role, in San Diego, we've had supporters that are advocating for conservatorship. So that's obviously like not what we're hoping to see from this role. It's really about supporting the person's autonomy. And I think we covered that quite a bit, but I would say for the next step is to make sure that the volunteer supporter understands that role.
Thank you. All right, Martin, what's your 10-second elevator speech for what we should do next?
10 seconds. Maybe review what programs and services already exist and whether those could be leveraged to really support the volunteer efforts, such as LA County, we have service extenders, we have wellness outreach workers. Those are all volunteer peers with lived experience. So maybe you already have something that you could build a bridge and leverage.
Thanks, Martin. Melanie, last but not least, take us home.
Amazing suggestions, and I agree with them. And I just want to highlight again what Amber said much earlier, like developing a guide and information and resources for the person in that role. My care analyst has been on this training, and that's where my head has been. It's like, we got to do that. We have to come up with some procedure around supporting the person in that role, because we haven't seen them really as, especially family member or friend, as one of the key people to be supported. So we're gonna reflect on that. So thank you, Amber. But everything that was said is absolutely true and exciting.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your knowledge and your experience today. It was so valuable. Patricia, if you would like to go ahead and close us out.
So thank you for joining this training. Hopefully you found the discussion hosted by HMA to be useful in figuring out how to implement these support roles on the ground. Again, our learning objectives today is that you would have an increased ability to explore strategies for integrating these support roles, and then also gain insights from other counties on successful models, adaptations, and lessons learned in organizing around these support roles. Again, if you have any questions or looking for a specific resource, please feel free to not only go to our website, but send us an email at info@careact.org, and we'll look at connecting with you and seeing what resources we can provide. Thank you.